Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rash's World. Today we have a very special guest. We have Dr. Baumeister. How are you doing today?
Oh, just fine. How are you?
Pretty good, not too bad. How would you, the first question is the toughest. How would you briefly describe yourself to our audience here?
Briefly describe myself.
What would you
Um,
say? Anything
um,
you like?
well, I trained as a laboratory experimental social psychologist. I also study personality. I had a background in philosophy, and so I set my career to tackle big philosophical questions with social science methods.
Yeah, and you're approaching the big one, free will, one of the big ones, free will, and I find that fascinating, especially in the field of psychology. So your latest book is The Science of Free Will: Bridging Theory and Positive Psychology. Yeah, what are you going to tell us about free will here?
Right. Well, to look at it as a scientific problem, it's a slight change of emphasis from what the philosophers have been arguing about.
Hmm.
Uh, They have working on the theory of, well, if everything were absolutely determined, if the universe were a big clockwork machine, so to speak, could there still be free will in that? And
Hmm.
um, that's nothing we can really do with an experiment. We can address in the lab. But I'd say it this way: over the years, I've talked to lots of people, lots of scientists who say there cannot be any free will, and others who are fine with the concept. And I mostly agree with both of them because they're not talking about the same thing. It's really a matter of how they define it.
Yeah.
Um, and so, even more surprising, they both agree that the human mind, the human brain, has a system for controlling action that's just way beyond anything else in nature. So we evolved
Yes.
this new way to act, and so they're just arguing about whether it needs to be called free will. I would say the scientific task is let's understand how this marvelous new mental system works. So many chapters in the book are looking at things that only humans can do. For example, we can mentally simulate multiple futures depending on what we do now. And then we
Mhm.
could bring that back into the present and change our behavior in the present based on the future. Animals, they only do future-oriented stuff when it's hardwired. They don't really know when they're doing, like a squirrel burying nuts or something. It doesn't have a master plan. It's just, it thinks this is a good place to bury a nut, and and then come winter, this will be a good place to dig for a nut. Um, but uh, but humans make plans for years in advance, and also we celebrate or operate based on things we did long ago in the past. So the time dimension is already one big change for humans.
Yeah, and I think there has to be something for existence too. I mean, if we don't have free will, I just think, also philosophically, like, what's really the point? And we just machines going through things. So what's life? So it's nothing. But I think there is because, like a year ago, you would have never like seen me go to the gym like Monday morning, and I was there yesterday. So I'm wondering, like, something must be going on. Something has changed within me that I think it was partly also my own doing where I decided that this is going to be important to me. Whereas like a year ago, it wasn't. I said, over my dead body, you'll find me in the gym. And now I'm actually willingly going there. So there has
Yeah,
to be an element of free will there.
it's nice that you bring that up because it's self-control is the ability to change yourself, and that's what got me into it. I was doing laboratory research on self-control and limited willpower, things like that. And then it turned out the same energy was used for making decisions. So I said, well, this is bigger than just self-control.
Hmm.
Um, and that's what got me to thinking, oh, this may be what free will. I mean, if there's no free will, this is was mistaken for it, and if there is free will, this is what it is. Um, it's not really conceivable that there's another process independent of planning and rational decision making and self-control and stuff. A lot of the philosophy books had examples of self-control and examples of rational choice, but they didn't have any way of showing that those two are the same. Whereas that's what the laboratory researcher can do. He can show that after people make choices, then their self-control is not so good, and after they exert self-control and use up some of their willpower, their decision making gets more easy, shortcut kind of thing, not thought us through as well. So we can show that there's some underlying common psychological resource there.
I think it's also semantics because like also like the word determine itself, like free and will, like we're free to choose what we will. And I don't think that's the case. I think that it comes with degrees. Like we're free to a certain extent. So it's not the absolute freedom we're talking about. So for example, like in terms of like what I'm going to have for breakfast, there's a limited cho array of choices that I'll have. I'll
Yeah.
never have something that's really outside of it, and it would take probably a lot of effort to get there. But I think a lot of us are also kind of trapped in this kind of, I call it the zombie state, the autopilot of like we do things the same way we keep doing, and then we don't grow. We get kind of stuck in a routine. And
Yeah.
so I think the free will is what that jolts us out of that. I think that's the energy there.
Well, using free will takes energy. It's difficult, so we can't do it all the time. That's
Exactly.
why most of life
Yeah.
has to be on automatic pilot and so
hmm
on. Yeah, you could get up in the morning and use your free will to decide what to do about breakfast and should you have a shower first and all that. But most people want to conserve their mental energy for the challenges of the day, so they
hmm
have a pretty set morning routine and do the same things in the same sequence.
hmm
Um, so yes, you can say we're trapped in autopilot, but the system is designed so we can do that, so we don't need to be using our highest mental powers all the time. Because well, the brain's a very expensive organ. It
No, absolutely. No, I agree with that. And I think that's very useful, but also like not everything in that zone where we need to like decision making as well or
right.
behavior. I think
Yeah.
that's where it becomes very important. And we take it for granted or we disregard it. And I think that's an issue. Again, the link between free will and behavior. If I mean we have to be to
Yeah.
a certain extent accountable and responsible for our behavior. So there is morality. Otherwise, just like there is no morality, and we can't judge people, and we can't like have people responsible for their actions. And I think there is a responsibility we all have. There's a choice we all have at any point of our life. The degree is different, most likely, but there is always an element of choice in everything, I think.
Well, let me comment on a couple things you said here that are really good. One is that yet there are degrees of freedom. Um, a lot of the debates about free will, like I debated with that Robert Sapolsky about that, and he said, no, no, there can't be any free will. But he wanted complete freedom, independent of all causes, anything that happened. What would be the use of that? Why would that
Yeah,
even
exactly.
involve?
Yeah.
So he was swayed a little bit when I said, in psychology, everything's on a continuum. I mean, you can
hmm
talk about high self-esteem and low self-esteem as if they're types, but when you actually get a sample of people's self-esteem scores, they're on a bell curve and spread out along a continuum. And so all we need is that some actions are freer than others. We don't
hmm
need either extreme, that there's any absolute no freedom. Because even if somebody's pointing a gun at you, you can still say no, which
hmm
occasionally
hmm
people have done. And the complete freedom of being independent of everything, what use is that? But
Exactly. Yeah.
along the way, in the middle, there are lots of some choices are freer than others. We did an experiment a few years ago where we just asked people to write about experience you had where you acted of your own free will and one where you didn't.
hmm
And everybody could do that. Nobody said, I've never had that kind of action. Everybody knew the difference, and we coded them. There were systematic differences in the stories. Like, was there an authority figure bossing you around? Were you getting to a happy ending? Things like that. So the difference is quite real in data. And the other thing I wanted to comment on was morality. You mentioned that.
hmm
Yes, that's extremely important. That's one of the basic reasons.
hmm
The whole idea of free action is important and popular. When you make a moral judgment about what somebody did, you say, well, should he have done something different?
hmm
Which presupposes that he could have done something different, which is the scientific definition of free will, being able to act differently in the same situation. So every time we make a moral judgment, we assume there's some, and legal judgments are kind of the same. The Supreme Court has written about that free will is implied strongly in lots of our legal proceedings, and if somebody couldn't help what they did, then we don't punish them as much. Uh,
Exactly. Yeah.
if they had to make a knowing choice to do wrong and to break the law.
And in positive psychology, I mean, we have Seligman had the learned helplessness, and that's something that
Right.
we do have. But then his more recent stand is more on agency. and what I would call maybe helpfulness instead of helplessness, where you just realize that you do have a certain amount of control. Again, not absolute, we're not talking absolute
Right.
terms, but that's empowering, that I can actually change things. And again, maybe like the going back to the gym example that I give, that it's kind of maybe a muscle that we can grow by engaging in it, but
Yeah.
by flourishing in that space.
Yes, yes, indeed. The muscle analogy guided much of my research when I was
Mhm.
studying self-control, that it gets tired when you use it, but if you use it regularly, it gets stronger. And we found both of those in self-control research with ordinary people. So yes, you can improve your self-control, which is very useful. It's one of the most beneficial traits that psychology's ever worked with. You
Mhm.
say that and intelligence are the two things that you're just always better off having more.
Hmm. Yeah, and you talk about you have studies on ego depletion, and here maybe also the lack of energy. And I'm thinking like for myself, like the moment that I dealt with anxiety, I found I had so much more energy at my disposal. And I'm somebody who strongly believes in psychoanalysis too, because there's all these stuff, unconscious stuff that's brewing. And once we resolve them, we have all these extra energy that we can use for other things. And that's when that can be an element of free will where we can guide things instead of being guided by those forces.
Yes, yes. The free will is the conscious, of course. There's no theories of unconscious free will, but it
Hmm.
has to deal with all the unconscious stuff going on. And
Exactly.
like you say, if you've got something really going on down there, messing you up or making you do things that you're sorry about, uh, getting to be more conscious so you can understand why you're repeating this bad pattern, then maybe you can stop doing it. And then, like you say, that gives you more energy instead of digging yourself a hole that you have to dig yourself out of again.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. But also like looking at today, I think people are very much on the defensive about things, and just the whole issue of also identity, that how it's like going in a certain direction, and I feel like it's not very conducive for free will. Free will. It's not as much. I would say encouraged, I think, where people want you to be a certain way, and then that gives away your autonomy or the way you are, your own way of being. And do you see like kind of like I'm saying, like more a negative trend instead of not really fostering that, especially when it comes to like our society and politics today?
Yeah, well, I don't get into politics. It's such a mess. Uh, but uh, but you're right. The trends have been in the wrong direction. I
Mhm.
mean, people have been arguing that self-control is declining, that parents aren't as strict with their children anymore, and schools aren't as strict. You don't if you don't hand in your work on time, there's no penalty. Um, and all these things are prone to weaken the ability to have self-discipline and self-control, which again is one of the most beneficial traits in society. So yeah, there are some things going in the wrong direction. Whether we'll get that sorted out, I don't really know. My generation, the baby boom, I think bears some responsibility. We didn't want to be strict like our parents were with us, and so we started taking it a lot easier on our children. We also had fewer, and then you invest more in each one, and so on. So I don't know what the future holds, and whether we'll get things going in the right direction again or not. But
It's kind of like a pendulum. I think it goes this way and that way. I grew up in Germany. For me, like discipline and doing everything on time and like being
yeah,
punctual as well, it was very important. And there were consequences if you didn't. But my son is growing in a completely different environment, different school, and different mentality. And it's too relaxed. I think my way was too extreme, and I think this way is also too extreme. So again, if we can find that middle ground, would be
yeah,
perfect.
yeah. That's the thing. People say, "Oh, I don't want to. I want to go to the opposite extreme,"
Hmm.
and then that's no good either. Yeah, it was the strength of the German nation, all that good self-control and punctuality and so on. And yeah, I'm sure they overdid it at various
Of course.
places.
Yeah.
But you don't want to go to the opposite extreme. And I don't know, modern schools. and parenting are both very easy on the child. And then if we, as long as life is good, that
Hmm.
won't cause trouble. But if we had another major challenge, I remember my professors and so on talking about during World War II, and everybody rushed to sign up to go fight the Germans and the Japanese and so on. And there's a big sense among the men that this is our duty to take care of the country and risk our lives to do that. I don't think you'd get that response today. People would not be eager, and they'd be looking for every loophole to get out. So,
And I don't know where I stand on that myself. I don't know which one I prefer because there's also it can be misused and abused, that kind
right,
of thing. And we have this need, and it's not a desire, a really need to belong to certain groups, to a nation, to like certain groups that we identify with. And I think that that can cause problems too if you're just going along with them and you kind of give up your free will or your rational thinking sometimes and just follow to fit in. And I think
yeah,
that's an issue. That's always been an issue, but I think it's more so when some of the things that we used to belong to have disappeared or are not as popular anymore, and others are taking hold. So it's like, and that shapes our society and our way of being, our lifestyles too.
yes, yes. Um, and there's also all this celebration of the victim role, but a victim role is very passive.
Yes.
When people like it because they say, well, nobody can blame us for anything. We're not
Hmm.
responsible. Uh,
Hmm.
which is already a bad way to approach life in
But
society.
it's not empowering. I mean, we talk about empowerment, and that's the exact opposite. You're just like putting yourself in a corner, I find, and
Yeah,
where it's like, you can free yourself up, but then that takes effort, and you might step out of that group that it was supporting you and cheering
yeah,
for you.
yeah. Well, I think what society needs in terms of free will, what it needs people to have is autonomy and responsibility.
Hmm.
Autonomy is self-government. That means you can make your own choices and so on. And responsibility is you understand the consequences of your actions and accept them.
Hmm.
And when people behave in that way, society can flourish. I think a
Hmm.
lot of these psychological traits, I say every species has to solve the problems of survival and reproduction. We solve it in a very unusual way, we human beings, with using culture to organize our social life so that we produce more resources and share them and take care of each other and all these things. And so all the traits that set us apart as human, the human essence, is a result of biological adaptations to enable us to do culture.
Hmm.
Starting with language is the obvious one. No other species has language. They communicate a little bit, but they don't have what linguists say is a real language. Whereas every known human society has language,
Hmm.
and it had to have a variety of changes to the throat and the mouth and the ears and the brain so we could do language. Um, but anyway, that's one of the essentially human traits.
And also, one of the things that you have studied, and I'd be very curious about, is the differences in gender, and especially when it comes to sexuality, and also culture plays a huge role in that too, of like how we express it and how we express our emotions and our desires. And so, what would you like to share with us here in that terms about? And I like the term erotic plasticity, for example. If we can get a little bit into that.
Oh yeah, I just gave a lecture on that in China. Um, they don't talk about sex very much, but
Uh,
the idea is how much does the sex drive, how much is it influenced by cultural and social and situational factors versus how much of it is pretty well hardwired based on your genes and so on. I think everybody working in the sex area acknowledges that the sex drive is shaped partly by nature and partly by culture or nurture, but they have very different ideas as to how much of each. And
mhm,
what I came to realize, and published a big article with a ton of evidence on that, it's different recipe for the male and the female. The male is more nature,
mhm,
and the female is more cultural.
mhm,
So even things like whether you're gay or straight, men are pretty much one or the other, uh, whereas the women often will go back and forth if they depart at all from heterosexuality. Um, And so, plenty of other things. We looked at education. The most educated women and the least educated women have very different sex lives.
Hmm.
For the men, the difference is much smaller. And the same goes for religion. The most religious versus the least religious women have very different sex lives. But the men not so much.
Hmm.
And well, religion and education are two powerful forces in society, and they push in opposite directions.
Yeah,
High education
exactly. Yeah.
goes for more sex and more variety and more practices, and more religion goes for less of all those things. So in both cases, women are affected more than men, and there's no value judgment. People always worry, okay, which is better or whatever. I suppose there's a slight advantage in being able to adapt to new circumstances. And there is some evidence that when women move to a different country, they adjust to the new sexual norms or whatever more easily than men do. But in general, there's no value difference. It's just we need to understand them even for treating problems. There's a big study in the UK, whereas men's sexual problems were correlated with their physical problems, physical health. And for women,
Yes.
it was mental health.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So it's a very different kind of treatment that's needed. And for most of men's problems, Viagra uh,
Yeah.
solved a lot of that. It just you're taking a pill. It's a purely physical intervention, and once that worked, you didn't have to go through all the talking cure and insight and what does it mean and all that. But for women, the pills don't solve the problem. For them,
Mhm.
it's a much more emotional and meaningful aspect, and so understanding that is a factor there too.
Yeah, and I think the issue of self-control comes into play too, where self-control might not be a good thing in certain situations where it's too controlling, you're too restricted, especially in expressing sexuality. And I think like there's always like society is always kind of discouraging it, or culture often tends to discourage, or religion especially when you look at that. So that can create a conflict, but then there is that free will of do I am I controlled by this, or do I kind of make my own rules as I go along. But that's also very tough to do, very difficult thing.
Yeah. The idea that there can be too much self-control or that it can be bad. Um, I've watched for that for decades now, and
Hmm.
it's an intriguing idea, but there's really not much evidence. As one expert put it, Nancy Eisenberg, who studied self-control in children, she said there are over-controlled kids, but these are kids with really strict parents, and they're sort of just
Okay.
afraid. It's not that
Yeah.
they have too much self-control. Self-control is good because it enables you to change yourself.
Hmm.
And so the effects are linear. We have a questionnaire measure of personality trait of self-control. When we developed it, my co-author June Tangney had a large data set of all kinds of problems and aspects, and I said, well, look for any downturn at the top. Basically, more self-control goes with better outcomes. But let's really try the data and any sign of it turning downward that there's too much at the high end, and we did not find it. So I don't think it's really an ability. I mean, it's like intelligence or like a hammer. It's
Hmm.
a tool.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can hurt somebody with a hammer, but
Yeah.
it's not the hammer's fault.
Yeah.
And you want to have a good hammer when you have a hammering job to do. So you want to have good self-control, and it looks like the more the better, and it produces all sorts of good benefits. You tell parents, forget about self-esteem in your children, concentrate on self-control. That's what will enable them to be successful in life and happy and well loved and everything else.
Well, but the thing, so I watched an interview with Scott Galloway, and who's basically telling young people to get drunk because it's like that kind of like overbearing self-control, and the way to overcome it, because then you can bond with others. You overcome the fear. I completely agree. It's based on fear, but that sometimes we need that, and that kind of movement of also younger males not being so much interested in relationships, or people not drinking anymore, the no alcohol thing, which is again, alcohol is not good, but also the extreme, I think, can cause problems because there are benefits to it, social benefits, relationship,
Definite
and so
benefits
on.
for alcohol. And yes, I started reading that fellow's book, Drunk. It's a history of alcohol,
Mm,
Slingerland. Uh,
Hmm.
he said it was often a way for men to make a deal uh,
Hmm.
because you couldn't lie. You didn't know if you could trust this other person, so you'd go get drunk together and see
Yes.
what he's like when he can't keep up the pretense anymore. And certainly all throughout history and modern history too, a lot of people get together and drink alcohol and talk and laugh and have a good time.
Yeah.
I feel a little bad for young people who are missing that out.
Yes.
Um, and being alone in their room with their phone or their screen or whatever is not
Yeah.
a real substitute for that. We just have a paper accepted for publication where we reviewed a lot of the research comparing live face-to-face interaction versus computer
Mhm.
mediated, which is
Mhm.
like what we're doing now.
Yeah.
And there's something lost. It's much better than nothing. I mean, you're in Vancouver, I'm in Utah. We
Yeah.
couldn't have this conversation without the technology, and so that's a real plus. But when it replaces live interaction, there's something lost. You don't have as much emotion. You don't
Yeah.
get your body doesn't turn on like your heart beating faster and so on. You don't
Yeah.
think things through as much. You don't process the information. Relationships are slower to develop.
Yeah.
So, um,
And there's no touch. I mean, that's really
yeah,
important. Like even like just the element of like touching somebody's hand or on the shoulder, and that's missing, and
yes,
that's a huge thing, I think.
yeah, that is a huge thing, and to varying degrees. It's some relationships have a lot more touching than others,
Sure.
but there's usually some, and
Mhm.
people at least shake hands and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's a real thing to miss.
So I'm wondering what you think of the holistic approach of things. I mean, the mind, body, spirit, if you like to throw in there, because I found it very interesting where you say like, well, this causes like mental health issues, whereas this causes what may causes physical issues. And so I'm thinking like, do you believe that there is like a clear like, well, not clear, but there is a connection between these elements? That what goes on in the mind influences the body and so on. And we have it with like, stress responses and fear and all that. So do you agree with that, that there is
Oh
a
yes, absolutely. There's definitely plenty of interaction between them, and even our work on ego depletion when you
Mhm.
use up your willpower and so on. I found if we gave people a drink with sugar in it, then they suddenly were better again.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
we don't recommend people use sugar in their daily life, but in the lab, you only have people for a short time, so you want to give them something that gets
And
into
you
the
can't give them alcohol, right? So that's off
that
limits.
alcohol makes self-control worse.
Hmm. Very
Uh,
true.
but sugar will give it a temporary boost.
Hmm.
So it's part of the body's energy supply that seems to be depleted, and there are plenty of other effects too. You mentioned stress hormones and
Hmm.
all sorts of things. Um, Another thing talked about in this review article was when people text LOL, they laughed out loud. I asked people, "Did you really laugh out loud?" And they say, "No." Uh, But laughing out loud is good for you. It reduces stress hormones. It has a
Yes.
variety of other interpersonal bonding effects. So it's just one of the many things that gets lost to some degree when people shift to interacting with technology.
Exactly. And so a final question here. I'd like to know how like you say you were interested in philosophy and how you bridging that to like how does that influence your work, your view in philosophy, and what did you take out of it? And you said, do you still continue with philosophy or did you start off with philosophy? Like the influence there of philosophy in your work as a psychologist.
Yeah. Well, it's come and gone at different periods. When I was at Florida State, one of my best friends there, Al Mealy, is one of the world's top philosophers, and um, he was having some programs to get research grants that combine philosophers and psychologists to work together. So we did a bit of that. Um, at other times, you just get caught up in the psychology of things, and uh, uh, so a couple points. One is philosophers think much more carefully and precisely than psychologists.
Hmm.
As Mealy explained to me, that's all we have. We don't have data. We don't have physical
We
things.
can't do experiments, right? In philosophy
Experiments, yeah.
necessarily.
They,
Yeah.
they've started actually an interesting line of experimental philosophy, but it's sort of to see what ordinary people think about what their intuitions are. So basically not. It's mainly a think very carefully. So their theories are very carefully thought out, whereas psychology, you can just sort of you don't have to worry about the borderline cases or anything. You can just
Mhm.
look at the main case and maybe do some experiments and collect some data on that. They're both good, and I've
Yeah, of
spent time
course.
in both, but I wish there were more contact with philosophers in general in psychology because it would sharpen up our concepts and our theories, which are often rather careless and intuitive.
Yeah.
Um, but as I said, we have data and we can test things, and so we can find out things that philosophers cannot get at, like that rational choice and self-control have some common psychological underpinning because doing one affects the other. Philosophy also has had a traditional focus on big questions. There's
Mhm, exactly.
some meaning of life things there, where some people say meaning of life should be a top problem in philosophy that they talk about all the time, and others say philosophers never want to talk about the meaning of life. It's it's
It's
too
personal. Yeah.
personal, or
Yeah,
it's too big and complicated. They want to
exactly.
focus more narrowly on small issues. But for me, try to do social science. Part of it is to address these philosophical questions. So I had a book on identity, a
Mhm.
book on meaning of life, a book on why is there evil, nature and culture, free will.
Mhm.
Um, so a lot of these questions uh, I can address again with not saying thinking very carefully about what should this be, but just look at hundreds of published studies and what are the big patterns there
Mhm.
that we can learn from and put together. So a number of my books have sought to do that, and I hope the free will book does well in that too.
Yeah, and I love that you're bringing free will into the discussion. I remember like taking a class on the history of psychology, and it started off with the ancient Greeks, and I thought like, well, they were the same thing until they split off. And I kind of like it when they maybe kind of the synthesis of going back to that and using both, and not just one discipline, but combining it again, kind of joining philosophy with psychology, which is what you're doing to a certain extent here in your book.
Yes, yes, I wanted to pull them together and uh, again, it's reformulating the problem somewhat. What philosophers are arguing about is not something we can solve, uh, but we can explain a lot about how this marvelous new system works. I mean, we
Mhm.
mentioned the moral agent. I mentioned two other examples of free will that people can relate to. One is an economic agent. Um, Trade is, Matt Ridley says, over 100,000 years old. This goes way back in our species. And once again, as far as we know, all human societies have trade to some degree. All modern countries have money. Um, but no animal society has anything like that. They don't trade, they don't bargain, they don't have money. Um, so again, it's something essential to being human. It's using culture to apply to organize social life so that it works better. And the
Mhm.
market is, the buyer wants to buy, the seller wants to sell. If they can make the deal, they're both better off.
Mhm.
So this is a big plus. This is how culture works to improve our lifestyle. But again, it's beyond the capacities of other animals. And the other agent is an information agent. We spend a lot of time trafficking in information, including like what we're doing right now, tossing ideas around
Mhm.
and so on.
Mhm.
But even it's more basic stuff like looking up what time does the bank open and all that. And we don't just repeat what we hear. We question it or criticize it, argue about it with others. Thomas Suddendorf had a fascinating book called The Gap. It was a difference between humans and the other great apes. What is the gap? And one of the big conclusions was that we, unlike all of them, when we find out something new, we just have an urge to tell somebody.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
know that? I mean, even outside looking at the sky and see a shooting star or something. I got to tell somebody about this. And that's apparently gone.
Yeah.
It isn't no sign of it in other animals.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
But uh, but it's one of the foundations of culture, which is based on shared information. So we go and we deal with information a lot. Sometimes people tell lies, of course,
Mhm.
But a lot of it is passing along true information and refining it and building on it and so forth.
Yeah, I'm thinking of blogging there because that's when I have a discovery. I want to blog and share it with the world. And some people use social media, but that again,
Yeah.
what's the purpose there? Sometimes you want to impress others, and you're not being authentic in many ways. But I want to also here just state that not believing in free will is bad for your health. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, this is something that there are a fair amount of data on that people have studied. People believe in free will, and
Because we
uh,
don't have to believe in the truth of it because it's not a philosophy. As philosophers, you have to say, well, is this true or not? But here we're looking what's good for your health, and believing in it is whether it's true or not. It's the
yeah,
belief in it.
well, it's probably at extremes of believing you can't have any control over your life. That's very depressing, and
Yes.
that is how depressed people think. I'm not sure that's why they're depressed, but it is one clear
Mhm.
symptom and contributes to their problems. I have a friend who's a therapist, and she says, "Oh, the depressed people, just getting them to get out of bed is hard enough, and then convincing them to take control of their life and make decisions. They don't want to take responsibility. They don't want to do anything. So, yeah, not believing it is bad. Lab studies have shown that people don't believe in free will, they behave worse. It goes with
Exactly.
morality, uh,
Yes.
and uh, and so there's some dispute about, most people believe in it to some degree, but some people believe in it more than others. And there are a few laboratory procedures that try to manipulate people to get them to believe in it more or less, which sometimes work, and they usually produce believing in free will less produces worse effects, like lying to others or cheating others or stealing money. Um, so, so believing in it, I think, is good, but the evidence isn't overwhelmingly strong.
hmm And what do you believe in destiny here is my final question. What do you like? I mean, for me, that's something that I find puzzling, but I think there's an element of that too, like some like fate and destiny. Or do you think that is something like, no, I mean, as a philosopher, I'm really interested in that question too. So is that something you also deal with, struggle with maybe, or do you have a clear view on that?
I don't know. I mean, what do we mean by destiny? That there is some fate that is meant for
hmm
you, that that's
hmm
going to happen no matter what?
No matter what. Yeah.
Well, no, I don't really think so. I mean, you're all going to die no
hmm
matter what, so that would be our destiny. But that you would achieve something in your life, no. I'm certainly looking at my own life and the number of turning points and things could have gone in a very different direction. And um, you, it didn't seem like it was inevitable that I would end up where I am now, that was my destiny.
hmm
Um, and I don't know how that could be. It can't be a biological thing because
hmm
you're biologically the same as somebody born 200 years ago. But
hmm
back then, you couldn't do technology or be an astronaut or fly in an airplane or any kind of things that didn't exist back then. Um, so it would have to be something there in the structure of society that's somehow earmarked for you, but if you didn't do it, somebody else would. We think
hmm
of marrying. You marry one person, and if you don't marry this person, somebody else will marry them, or they'll
Right.
go,
Yeah.
or they'll remain
Yeah.
single.
Yeah.
Um, so it's hard to believe in destiny. It's a
hmm
nice idea. It appeals
hmm
to the romantic
Yes,
stuff in
that's
me.
me, definitely. Yes.
Uh,
Because I don't think it's not just anyone. There is like a special connection. But I find that very fascinating that there are people I meet for the first time and I have this special connection with them and it's real. I mean, we get along and people I
yeah,
know for many years that is not the same. And so, and like it doesn't make sense because it should make sense that, we're together, we know each other for a really long time, then we should have a closer relationship than somebody I just met and I click with. So
right.
that kind of makes me think of there's might be another thing going on.
Yeah, there could be rules, reasons for that other than destiny.
Yeah,
I mean, some people just have similar personalities
yeah,
or
yeah,
similar smell, for all I know. Um,
yeah. Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. F. Baumeister. Your book is the latest book is The Science of Free Will, Bridging Theory and Positive Psychology. Thank you so much for being on Arash's World. Such a pleasure talking to you.
Okay, thanks, Arash. Been fun.
Thank you.